Now, I'd like to make 3 points today. The first point I want to talk about is say something about leadership. And then I'd like to try and share with you an Asian perspective about how we see things in Asia. And then thirdly, I'd like to talk about what are the barriers we need to overcome in order to make tough choices. Going back to the issue of leadership, I know from the experts you have many definitions. You have many, many different ways of looking at leadership. Perhaps if I can oversimplify it, for me, leadership somehow involves transformation. Of course, we have many people in leadership positions, but I think we're not quite just talking about that. We're talking about some quality of leadership. And as Leland Russell mentioned, that we're at some critical point in the world, what is it that we're looking for? And that's the same in my country and in yours. We know that we're not going to overcome these challenges that we have if we're not able to transform. The kind of leaders, the kind of institutions that can help us, that create opportunities, or can take on opportunities, even if they didn't create the opportunities, opportunities may arise out of some circumstances that we don't expect. Those leaders who can help us to take advantage of those moments, I think ordinary people, we'd like them to take those chances. And in taking those chances, obviously their priorities, their beliefs, their values will matter a lot. So, as I said, leadership is very much linked to transformations, and in taking those opportunities, leaders have to take tough choices. And how do we take tough choices? Let me leave this question there, because I'm not sure I can answer it. Perhaps this is something that we have to do together. How do we take tough choices? Well, perhaps let me use something that is happening this weekend as a reflection point. Leaders from 20 countries, and I'm talking about the top political leaders, they're now all flying into Washington, D.C. There is the G20 leaders meeting hosted by President Bush in Washington on the 15th of November. In fact, this week, the finance ministers from various countries have been meeting to talk about, of course, the current financial crisis that the world is in. But what is special about this meeting is that the top leaders, presidents and prime ministers, are gathering. They're going to gather for a day, and they're going to continue to reflect on the discussion about the financial crisis that their finance ministers have started to talk about. Well, out of the 20 countries, 5 of them are from Asia. We have China, India, Japan, Korea, and Indonesia. So you have 3 very large countries, purely by size, China, India, and Indonesia. And then you have 2 relatively small countries, Japan and Korea, because of the economic influence that they already have in the world. The reason that it's not just the developed countries that are gathering, because for many years, bodies like the G8 is really a club of the rich. But now we have G8 plus 5, we have G20, and then of course you have G77, which is everybody else. So whenever we look at these packages of countries, we begin to ask, how do we see ourselves? Why are we packaged in this way? Well, this tells us something, of course, about our history. But let me come to that in a moment. Now, as we read the newspapers this week, and as we read the newspapers after the 15th of November, what do you think the leaders will talk about? Well, we know what the problem is, and in fact, they are going to spend some time talking through the nature of the problem. But of course, what they've set themselves to do is to see whether they can come to some consensus about reforming the financial services sector, the architecture of financial regulation. Whatever they decide, their decisions have to be implemented back home. And this is where local politics come in. For those of you who are Americans, and I believe that's the vast majority of you, I'm going to ask you to excuse me in terms of what I'm going to say, because I may not have got it right. But if I've got it wrong, see this, please, as a struggle of a foreigner trying to understand what is happening here. And I'll try and share with you how we look at the current crisis with an Asian perspective. We get a sense in Asia that Americans hate paying taxes. Well, that's not to say any of us like to pay taxes, but the taxation system is one, of course, we all have. Governments are the only entity that are allowed to raise taxes. And they raise taxes in order to do the collective good. Let me give you an example. When we've talked about things like green taxation, or right now a very popular issue, which I personally work on, about carbon taxes because of climate change. We've had people say to us, Americans will not agree because they don't like paying taxes. Now, this issue about taxation has come back in the current financial crisis in terms of, well, are we going to spend our way out of problems, or are we going to save, or how are we going to deal with this issue? Now, coming from Asia, the way we look at our current economic systems is that America likes to buy things that we make, right? Everything's made in China. And so in the last 25 years, we've developed what we call export manufacturing. Now, I don't know how many times you've read about how China's foreign exchange reserves have again gone up by billions of dollars. And this is, a lot of it comes from our exports. After we have earned the money from exporting things, we need to invest it somewhere. We don't necessarily invest it domestically. We've also invested in US Treasury bonds. So you immediately see, you can call it a symbiosis, you can call it codependency, or you can call it globalization. We are intimately connected. There are many foreign companies who have bought into businesses in China. The Chinese, in recent years, have come shopping in the West. We have welcomed overseas investments. We've wanted overseas investments because we've needed overseas investments, technology, in order to industrialize.